Welcome back to the Blazor Server In-Depth course. In this lesson, we're going to wrap up this section by going over our homework and reviewing what we've learned. So in this section, we talked about authentication and authorization. So authentication first was where we added authentication into our app and said, okay, when you start up the Blazor app, you'll have the ability to log in, and that's authentication, saying I am who I say I am. And then we also looked at how do you do that if your Blazor app already exists and you need to add that authorization, authentication after the fact. And so we did that as well. And then we finally looked at how do we say who can access certain resources or not. And that's the authorization part of things. Do you have the rights to go to a certain place? So in this section conclusion, we're going to build another application that uses these systems because of our homework. And the homework is to create a Blazor site with a full authentication system that has a page that elevates a specified user to be an administrator if they're not one yet. We're going to have two roles, administrator and employee, and then a page that only administrators can access, and a page that people in either role can access. Okay, so that's our target. That's what we're going to be shooting to get done. So let's start by going to Visual Studio, create a new project, Blazor app. This is a Blazor app, and this is section 7 homework. Make sure it's Blazor app. We are going to add authentication right away. So again, make sure it's individual user authentication, store user apps or user accounts in app. Okay, make sure it's a Blazor Server app .NET Core or ASP.NET Core 3.1. HTTPS will be checked by default and grayed out, so you don't have the ability to not have it checked. And then we'll hit create. All right, so now we have our Blazor app up and running. Let's go over to the startup and add our ability to have roles. So up here we're going to have identity, user role. Nope, not user. Add roles. There we go. And it's going to be of type identity role. There we go. So add roles, identity role. So now we have the ability to have roles. We're going to create a new page in order to have the add roles. So let's create a new page here, a new Razor component, and we'll call this add admin role or add roles. How about that? Okay, and again, that's going to be hidden, as I'm not going to put a link to this. We are going to have a URL for it, which is just add roles. And we'll just have a paragraph here that says, wow, little butterfingers here. Okay, so the paragraph will say, you just added the default roles and elevated a user to administrator. All right, there we go. And before we go any further, let's go to appsettings.json and add that user. So default admin is going to be Tim at iamtimcorey.com. And then what we'll do is we're going to, in our code, we're going to bring in first of all, using statement, using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Identity, and then inject, and we'll inject role manager identity role, and call it role manager. We'll also inject the user manager identity user. And then we'll also inject the I configuration, which I forgot to add that using statement. just like last time, using Microsoft.extensions.configuration. So iConfiguration, call it config. All right, so there's the 3 things we need for our page. Now you can come down here in code and we'll say private async task set up auth. And in here we'll do our string array called roles equal to, I'm doing the same code before, but we're typing back out just so you know how to do it. Administrator, and we'll also add one for employee. So there's 2 roles now. We'll add them both right here. So for each role in roles, we're going to say var role exists. I think I like exists better. Await role manager dot role exists async for the role, and then if role exists equals false, await role manager dot create async new identity role. So it's going to create a role for each of these role types. And then we're going to check to see if our user exists. Let's get the user separately. Let's just say, string admin equals, or admin email equals config.getValue. It's a string value, and it is default admin. I believe that's right. Yep, default admin. So that's going to be the admin user or admin email. And now we can say var user equals await user manager dot find by email async and the admin email. And if user is not equal to null, then we're going to await user manager dot add to role async user administrator. Okay, so now we have our role. We're going to add the admin user to. Now, probably every administrator is also an employee. That just seems to make sense. So we're going to tweak this in just a minute, but I also want to put one more tweak in here. Now, normally I wouldn't put this tweak in. I'd create a page that does management, a GUI that does management of users, but we're going to shortcut it for this because it's just for demonstration purposes that I want to have a user in just the employee role. So I'm going to copy this first, just this section right here, and we're going to paste it again. Only this time, what we're going to do is, I already have users, so employee, and for the email address, I'm going to just hard code it. All right, so we're going to take the dan@imtimcorey.com email address, and we're going to make that the employee. So if employee is not null, then not the administrator group, just the employee group. Now we're going to add the administrator to both groups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to say for each var role in roles. I'll paste this in and just put role here. So now this administrator will get added to both roles, both the administrator and employee, but down here, this hard-coded Dan will only get an employee role. So that way we can create another user, maybe Sue at imtimcorey.com, and then Sue will have nothing. She will not be an employee. She will not be and administrator. And so you can kind of see the contrast in all three different scenarios plus the logged out scenario. Okay, so that is our add roles page. We can close that out. And now we need to create a page that only administrators can access. Let's just use the existing fetch data. So only administrators can access this page. So I'm going to put up an attribute right here and say this is the authorize, but only for roles equal to administrators or administrator. All right. So this page is only accessible if you're an administrator. Now we have a page that is accessible by employees and administrators. Well, that's under the counter page. Now, just to be a little different, I'm going to show you two different ways of doing this. First of all, we can do the attribute and say authorize and then roles equal to administrator, comma, employee. All right, like so. So now either an administrator or an employee can access this page. There's another way of doing this though, and that is instead of having this attribute, we could wrap this entire page. So let's do this. Let's create a copy of this page. We're going to call it better counter. So it's not better, it's just different. In fact, different counter. So different counter is going to be the same thing as counter. Let's call it different counter. And we're not going to put the attribute here. And instead, what we're going to do is we're going to cut out all of the HTML. And we're going to put an authorize view around this. And we're going to say roles equal to administrator, comma, employee. And then we'll have an authorized view where we'll paste in all of our counter code. And then we'll have a not authorized where we'll paste in some other type of code. H1 not authorized. And we'll have our paragraph tag that says you do not have access to this similar but slightly different counter. Okay, so that's the counter page that is the different counter page. Let's add a navigation for that. We won't hide any navigation here because you've seen that already, but know that you can, and you probably would want to. Different counter. And let's change this to be something else. I saw a basket up there. That sounds cool. So we have counter and different counter. Again, we could hide this if you want to, but I want to show them all because I want to go to all of them even if I'm not allowed to, or try to go to them. Okay? So this does not have an attribute for authorize. It just has the authorized view with authorized or not authorized. And the authorization is based upon the roles. I'm not as big a fan of doing this for the entire page because it's a little cumbersome to have two sections like this and have stuff nested inside. I prefer to have the attribute at the top, but there are cases where you might want to have this authorized view with either certain content or the whole content behind the authorized, and then something different for the not authorized. Don't forget that this overwrites the default, which we haven't changed yet, in the authorized route view. That overrides whatever this would have been. Okay, since this is closer to the source. Okay, so now we have the different counter, which is for administrators or employees. We have the counter, which also is for administrators and employees, but uses the attribute instead. We have fetch data, which is only for administrators. Let's run this. Now, remember, we don't have any users created yet. So we'll need to do that. So we'll need to register, which I'm not sure we create our database even yet. Let's close this out for a minute. Let's go to our app settings.json. Our database is horrible. So let's call this the 7 Blazor or 7 section 7 DB. Okay, that's fine. And now let's update our database. So update database. That'll build, it'll succeed, it will publish our database and make sure we have everything cleaned up and ready to go. Wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. There we go, we're done. So now we can run this. Our database is created, but there's nothing in it yet. So let's register a few users. Let's register Tim. And then we're going to confirm the account. Then we're going to register another user, Dan. I would encourage you, if you're going to create test accounts, create one password and use it for everything. And I'll create one more, and this is Sue at imtimcorey.com. But having the one password just makes life a lot easier. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the Blazor app. We've not logged in yet, but we do want to go to the page, which I've already forgotten what its name is. Its name is Add Roles. So /add roles. You just add the default roles and elevate a user to administrator. Cool. Now just note, we can go to home. We cannot go to counter. We cannot go to a different counter, but we have the better authorization message. We cannot go to fetch data. All right, let's log in. Let's start with Sue. So Sue, remember, has no roles. All right, so Sue's logged in. Still not authorized for counter, different counter, or fetch data. Okay, so log out and log in this time as Dan. Okay, Dan can go to counter. Nope. Can go to different counter. Nope. Can go to fetch data. Nope. Well, that's interesting. Dan should have access. Let's make sure that if I log in as me, let's see if I have access. And we'll see if I bungled the code somewhere, not authorized. So it looks more like I'm not logged in, or we have not properly called this this add roles page. Okay, it says we've done this. But no, we haven't. Without even looking at it, I know what the problem is. Maybe you do too. You probably yelling at me already. So add roles. We have this really cool setup auth method. When do we call that? Oops, we don't. Forgot that. It's important to call this. So protected override. And we're going to have the onParameter set async, which causes a whole bunch of messed up code. Because of course it does. We're going to remove this. We're going to override async task onParameter set. And we're going to await setup auth. And now that should run properly when we go to that page. It's little details like that that'll trip you up. And again, it's okay. Oops, hit stop. Let's try it again. There we go. When you go to grab it, make sure you don't grab it by the X in the corner. Doesn't like that. All right, let's go to add roles. You just add the default roles and elevate the user. Great. Let's log off, make sure that no one has access, or unauthenticated doesn't. Let's log in again as Sue. And Sue does not have access. Let's log out, and this time we're going to log in as Dan. And this time, counter works. Excellent. So Dan can use a counter. Different counter still works. Fetch data, not authorized. So Dan's just an employee, but he has access to the counter and the different counter. Log out, log in. This time we're going to log in as Tim. Counter, that works. Different counter, that works. Fetch data, I had the weather forecast. Okay, so that's our homework. We have created a full authentication system. We create a page that elevated the users to a user to an administrator once we actually had it run properly. And then we created 2 roles as well, administrator and employee. And we had a page that only administrators can access, that's weather forecast. And we have a page that either role can access, counter and different counter. And that's not just if you're logged in, it's if you're logged in as either an administrator or an employee. Now note that I am both. I still have access. Okay? But that satisfies now our homework. So hopefully you got something similar. If you didn't, maybe try and follow my solution again. Try it out. Get used to using authorization and authentication. Make sure you know how to create those different roles, and maybe even build a little GUI that you can drop in. Because again, remember that Blazor is all about components. So if you create a GUI for managing your roles and your users, you could drop that in over and over and over again in other applications or other spots, and you just have it. So that'd be a great thing to think about adding. Okay, so that's the homework. That's the section. Hopefully you are comfortable with where you're at here. And as long as you are, move on to the next section. We're going to start working with data access. Okay?